If the public is very dissatisfied with the Republican leadership, which I think they were going to be, that's a prerequisite for Democrats to come back to power, but that's not going to be enough.
Donald Trump has given Democrats a lot of reason to worry, maybe even panic. But for this longtime thinker and strategist at the center of the party, the path forward is becoming clear.
We're out of power. We can't get anything done, but at least we need to be able to articulate a coherent narrative about the future.
Doug Sosnik is best known for being a top advisor to Bill Clinton. He's been in the private sector for years now. And for much of that time, he's been writing splashy memos about the state of American politics that can really get the town talking. He's given his newest one to Politico exclusively. Check it out in the Playbook newsletter. And it might be a tough pill for Democrats to swallow. But it's not all bad news. In fact, Democrats might have some opportunities soon.
I think the success for Democrats going forward are going to be our leaders in America, not our leaders in Washington.
I'm Dasha Burns, and this is Playbook Deep Dive. So you've seen the politics of old, and now you're witnessing the politics of new. You've got this set of slides out, some information that you want to share with the party, with the voters, with the political class. What was the goal of putting this information together?
Well, I used to say in the run-up to the 2024 election, you can't understand the 2024 election tree if you don't understand the forest that it's sitting in. And we're going through an historic period of transition in our country, and it's in real time. And it roots back 50 years or so in the early 1970s with the beginning of the decline of the middle class in America. And in combination with that, I think is a feeling by a lot of people, feeling of alienation towards our leaders and institutions.
I want to talk about where the Democrats are in this moment, because we are watching and reporting on the party trying to figure it out. And there are a number of different ways people are going about it. You have AOC and Bernie Sanders out there trying to rally progressives and the youth. You have James Carville saying, let's just hush up and be quiet and watch what Trump does and let him do the damage himself. And then you have Gavin Newsom out there launching a podcast, talking to Charlie Kirk and Steve Bannon and trying to bridge some of those partisan divides. Do you want to settle the argument? What's the right way to do this?
Well, I would say I'll answer that question, but some context first.
We love context here.
The Democratic Party is long overdue for what we're doing right now. For the last quarter century, Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton, and the Obama-Biden presidency have dominated the Democratic Party. So you've had for 25 years, there's been a whole generation of elected officials who've never had an opportunity to step forward to say who's got the right stuff. So that's happening now for the first time in a quarter of a century. And the other thing is, for the last 9 years, the organizing principle of the Democratic Party has not been who we are and what we want. It's been organized solely around our opposition to Donald Trump. So we have not had an opportunity as a party to sort out who we are and what we believe in and who our leaders have been. Going back almost a quarter of a century. So we're beginning this process now, and it's not a very pleasant process to watch, but we shouldn't be surprised that the Democrats in turmoil. We shouldn't be surprised that there's no leader right now. We're in the opposition. We shouldn't be surprised that we're flailing around trying to figure out who we are and what we're about, because we have not been dealing with these challenges for a long, long time, and there's no quick fix.
So are any of the folks that I just mentioned, are any of the directions that the Democrats are trying out right now the right way to go, or do you think it all needs to happen at the same time?
Well, I think it has to be sequential. We didn't get in this situation overnight as a party with our popularity now under 30%, and we're not going to fix it overnight. So I think there are several steps that we need to do going forward. The first is we have to have a narrative of defining Trump and Republicans based on what they're doing or not doing to help people in this country. And then, so if we talk about, as an example, Musk, it doesn't do us any good to go after Musk in the abstract. It has to go back to Trump and his presidency, not about Musk himself. And so I think also we have to have at least to pass so particularly people in this country, the 70% who don't have a 4-year college degree. Now, I worked for Bill Clinton for 6 years, and I would say, I guess I come from that wing of the Democratic Party. But I'll have to say, On economic issues, I think that what Bernie Sanders has been saying and AOC, which is really a populist economic agenda, I think is an important element to the Democratic Party going forward. I think they are right about their economic message. And I think that the message that we need as a party to largely focus on is economics and how it ties back to the middle class in this country. And as I said already once, I'll say it probably 10 times in this podcast, and how important it is to have a vision for the future to help the vast majority of people in this country that don't have a four-year college degree. We need to do well in the midterms, Democrats, and I think we probably will. But again, that's just an incremental part of the solution. The long-term solution for our party is going to sink or swim based on who we nominate for president and whether or not they win the election.
So right now, Democrats should have their eye on the prize for 2028, not 26.
Well, I think we have to multitask, and what we need to do to be successful in 2026 is not in conflict with what we need to do in 2028. But I think we have to understand that ultimately for us, I say there's always one and a half political parties in America. There's the party that's in control of the White House, and then there's the half party, which is in the opposition. Mm-hmm. We are the half party right now. We are in control of nothing. Now, for us to get back, we have to be able to define the Republicans and Trump, and they're helping us a lot, by the way. But we have to be able to define them in a way that drives down their numbers, which is happening in real time right now. And that's part of it. But ultimately, we'll never be successful. We can have a wildly successful midterm. Just in 2010, the Republicans had the most successful midterm since World War II. And 2 years later, they lost the White House. Yeah. So it's only an element. But the job of the Democrats and the DNC and all is ultimately to not make the Democratic Party brand so toxic that it brings down our 2028 nominee.
Do you think that Democrats like Chris Van Hollen fighting these deportations is playing into Trump's hands? Like, do you think these are the issues that they want to see Democrats stand up for because they're ultimately not that popular with Americans?
Well, I think that ultimately the most important issues for us to focus on are the issues that people care about in their lives, which is their lives and the economy. I do think that we have a kind of a moral obligation that when something is so manifestly wrong, on the deportations and what they're doing to that poor guy in El Salvador, I think we have an obligation to speak out about that, even though it's not our best argument against Trump.
Do you see Democrats missing the moment? Because you said earlier that there have been multiple instances where the Trump administration has kind of given you guys these gifts, these opportunities to point out wrongdoing or point out how things aren't going the way that they should be. But I personally have not seen Democrats taking advantage of any of these moments. What is going on there? Are they missing opportunities to define the Republicans, to define Trump, and to define the Democrats in opposition to that?
Well, we're the opposition party. We're out of power. And that, by definition, either you can look at it one of two ways. Either we have a large number of leaders or we have no leader. Yeah. And we fundamentally, as the opposition party, don't have a leader. And we're not going to have a leader until we have a nominee in 2028. It's not going to be the congressional wing of the party that's going to be our leader.
That's a long time, though, to wait for someone to come out of the woodwork and lead.
Most people either do campaigns or they do government. And that's one of the problems I think Trump has right now is he's running the government like it's a campaign. And ultimately, the Republicans and Trump are going to be defined by what they do or don't do in governing and how they govern and whether people's lives are improved or not. Ultimately, how people feel in their lives under the leadership of Trump and a Congress that's largely a supplicant to him is ultimately going to have the biggest impact on how they feel about the Republicans. If the public is very dissatisfied with the Republican leadership, which I think they were going to be, that's a prerequisite for Democrats to come back to power, but that's not going to be enough. In other words, that's the first step. And it's an important step, but ultimately there's such distrust with Democrats and who we are and how we've governed that ultimately, even if these guys, the Republicans implode, that doesn't guarantee that Democrats are going to assume power.
I mean, I think what your slides show is that Democrats have struggled both with message and messenger, with policy and policymakers. How do you find your way out of that?
Well, I mean, I think we can work on an architecture of a message which shows our values. And I think, again, as I said earlier, AOC and Bernie, I think a lot of their economic messages against the rich and the oligarchs, and I think having a pro middle class agenda, like probably say federal minimum wage.
Do you think that's the stronger direction versus what Gavin Newsom is doing in trying to, maybe appeal more to the center and bringing on conservative folks onto his platforms?
Well, I think there's a difference between what Gavin Newsom is doing something tactically to show that he can hang out with people who don't believe what he believes in. Mm-hmm. But AOC and Bernie Sanders, and I'm not from that wing of the party, what they are doing is talking about what they think should be done from a policy perspective to improve people's lives. And we need a strategy, not a tactic. And our strategy should be based at least on what our values are and what agenda we would have if we ever were able to return to power. And I think their economic populist message is an important element for that.
So that's a message. Messengers, who do you think are the White House level talents out there in the Democratic Party right now?
Well, I think the success for Democrats going forward are going to be our leaders in America, not our leaders in Washington. Mm. And one of the things that, our system is not perfect in terms of people running for president and figuring out based on that who becomes president. But our system is designed to challenge people and test people to see who's got what it takes to be president. And our system of campaigns weeds out people who don't have the right temperament. That's if you can't handle a campaign against a bunch of other people, how in the world are you going to lead the United States and the world? We don't know who those people are. And the only way we're going to find out is for them to have the opportunity to go out there and make their argument and case to the American public. And I'll just say to you, I think Bill Clinton and Barack Obama were pretty good politicians. When both Clinton announced in 91 and Obama announced in 2007, they were terrible candidates. And they had to go through the hazing of a campaign to get their voice. So it was the process that made them better. And we as a party haven't done that for a quarter of a century.
I mean, you wrote in an op-ed for the Times about how one of the reasons Democrats did rebound with Clinton and Obama was because they weren't really from the establishment.
Yes.
Does that mean that the future for the party in 2028 might be more like a Mark Cuban or a Stephen A. Smith rather than a Gretchen Whitmer or a Gavin Newsom?
Well, I don't think the future of our party is looking for a Mark Cuban or Stephen A. Smith. Let me start with that. No, I think it's probably either an elected official or a citizen leader from the states and not from Washington and not from the coast. Someone who's authentic, who,
You're talking governors, mayors.
Yes. And governors and mayors are CEOs. They do stuff, right?
Executives.
Exactly. They live above the restaurant and come down every day to work. I'll tell you, the way I look at politics is there are indoor politicians and outdoor politicians. Indoor politicians they have a roof over them. Yeah. They're senators. They give speeches. Yeah. Outdoor politicians are people that are out there in the field. They're in the crowds and people are sweating on them.
On the ground.
ground. And Trump's an outdoor politician, by the way.
Yeah, he is. I've been outdoors a lot with him.
And politics has changed significantly. But one of the things that hasn't changed is people want happy warriors as candidates. They want people who are running for office who they feel like they're enjoying themselves and that they like people. And, I think there's a toxic, angry sort of vibe to the Trump rallies. But there's also in all of that toxicity for those people is almost kind of the joy of the event.
Oh yeah, and I've been to enough of them. Yeah. I mean, it has like a fair vibe, yes. Right? Like a carnival vibe. Yes. People bring their kids. People bring picnic baskets. Yes. It's kind of a party.
Yes, and I think that I think people think that like Trump, don't like Trump. He is what he is. Yeah. I remember one thing back in the 2016 campaign, the Democrats were like, "Oh, we got proof that Trump hasn't been paying taxes, and this is going to kill him." So they cornered Trump and said, "Well, you haven't paid any of these taxes. You've made all this money. What do you say about that?" His answer: "Only an idiot pays taxes. I mean, if you can find a legal way not to pay taxes, then why would you pay taxes?" Yeah. And so there's an authenticity to what I think is just a profoundly horrible human being, but there's an authenticity to him that I think in an age where people are cynical and feel like nothing's on the level, at least they can take him for what he is.
Yeah. Yeah. I have spent the last 4 years really for the midterms in 2022 and for the election of 24 traveling the country and seeing what you actually have put into these slides, seeing it play out on the ground, seeing people without a college degree who maybe have never been involved in politics gravitate towards the Republican Party and towards Trump, seeing younger voters suddenly see Trump's maybe as kind of a meme, but still get engaged with it. Seeing voters of color who have been told by the Democratic Party for years that the Democrats were on their side and Republicans were against them suddenly start to question that. And like you said, Trump is a symptom, and he certainly put a bunch of fuel on the fire, but this has been a long time of evolution and a change within the parties.
And you think about younger people who all they've known in their lives is we went to war in Iraq on a lie. They saw what happened in the devastation of the 2008 economic crisis. So this is all they've seen in their lives. But I think the original bad seed for what's happened in America goes back to the Vietnam War in the 1960s. That was the first war that we were not all in this together. That was the first time that if you had money and power, you could game the system. And I think that began this schism in our society between the people who have money and power and the other people who don't. And I think for the people who don't have money and power, I think they resent it, I think, more about the fact that they think that the people who have money and power have gamed the system and made it unfair to them. Mm-hmm. And I think the seeds to that, as I say, go back over half a century, where people feel like the system is rigged.
And that is literally what Trump has used as part of his rallying cry. Yes. The system is rigged against you and I'm for you. Why have Democrats so struggled to capture that?
Well, I think we're captured a little bit by who we are and who we hang out with. And, with our divisions in our country, and you see it geographically now, I can drive through any community in America in a car and look out the window and tell you how they're going to vote. And Democratic parties. So we go back to Biden's victory. Biden was the first president to get elected since Bush in '88 without a political base. Mm-hmm. It was essentially, the Democratic Party was like a federation of special interests that all came together. They feared almost like a chemical reaction. They feared in the early primaries in 2020 that we were heading to nominating Bernie Sanders to be president. And so almost like a chemical reaction, the party coalesced around Biden because they thought that Sanders would bring the party down. And that's how Biden became the nominee.
Do you think they were wrong in that assessment?
No, I think history's proven they were right in the sense that Biden won, and by the way, he barely won. Mm-hmm. And I don't see anyone else who was running at the time that would have won. But the point is, Biden came to office beholden to a federation of special interests. I don't remember a single time in his presidency where he took on any single interest group. And so the combination then of having special interest groups driving the party and elites who are college educated and concentrated on the coast and college towns in the middle of the country, the combination of those two, it put it, and I'll give you one statement we used to say in the White House, which is pejorative, enabled us, or as a result of that, we became out of touch with America. And so what people would say, Democrats would say about flyover country, which is, that's a derogatory term, right? Yeah. I mean, that's by definition. If people think you're looking down on them,
literally,
why in the world would they consider voting for you?
Well, if you have voters who are pissed off at the party because they feel looked down upon, they're non-college educated. The thing that I hear a lot from folks is they are tired of the hair on fire from the Democratic Party for everything that Trump does, right? Then the fundamental question I've been trying to get a sense of with Democrats is the answer in this moment to fully oppose Trump or to see if there are ways that you can work with him? Is that the way? What is the way to get back some of those people who went towards Trump because of their frustrations with the party?
Well, we have to, as I said earlier, I think we have to do two things, then I'll get specific to answer your question. One is we have to define Trump in a consistent way so that everything we say about him goes back to the same narrative. It's not just a laundry list of things and our hair's on fire, as you say. And so we have to have a narrative against Trump, which I think is largely built around that his administration is screwing the middle class in this.
But who does that? Like, who do you put out the playbook and everyone follows it, or is there some edict from the DNC? Like, how do you actually get the messengers of the party that are out there right now on the same page about that?
Well, there's nobody in control,
right?
By definition, and so I think you have to. I think it would be helpful probably for the federal wing, the congressional wing of the Democratic Party to be able to come together with an agreement of what that is. We have 17 states where Democrats control, or 15 states, I think, where Democrats control power in the states. And we have over 20 attorney generals. So we have a lot of people, but we need to create a center of gravity. So I believe that we need to do, as I said earlier, two things. One is we have to define Trump and the Republicans in a consistent way. And the second thing is we do need to come up with at least the architecture of a series of principles and probably some issues that we're for. Like they did in the Contract for America in 94.
Right.
And so I think if we have a narrative in which every day we talk about whatever's happening that day, but it's in the context of that narrative, and that we have something that we are for, at least a set of principles, that's about as good as it can get. And so as I said earlier, in terms of what success looks like 2 years later, we want to have a good midterm. I think we'll win the governor's race in Virginia this year, and the press will overstate how important that is. So it's good to do well in politics. We should do that. And I think that we need to be able to define Trump. And I think, by the way, back to your question, I think he makes it easy in the Republicans in Congress. Even if you wanted to work with them, they're making it impossible based on the policy positions they're taking, based on how they're governing. So even if you want to work with this administration, it's almost impossible to, based on the fact that he's completely driven by his MAGA base. All his policies are driven by that. The way he's executing the office of the president is something we've never seen in our country before.
So you think there's no benefit to Democrats trying to work with the Republican Party in this moment? You think opposition is the answer?
I think if we can find something to agree on, we should. But I don't think, based on how they're governing, that's going to be a real problem for Democrats.
But you do see it being a problem for Democrats. I mean, the image floating around of Gretchen Whitmer in the Oval, but with the binders in front of her face. I mean, I think that is an image that captures the bind the Democrats are in. They want to be there, but they don't want to be there. I don't think there's been a clear answer of like, do we participate and try to find common ground, or are we just the opposition? And when you try to do both, you end up in the Oval with a binder in front of your face.
Well, let's talk about that for a moment. So that's a good example of what I said earlier about how the process of running for president weeds out people. And so she walked into that room, not expecting to have happen what happened. And probably the best thing to have done, and I'm sure if she could do it over again, she would not have used the binder strategy, is she should have walked up to the desk where the president was and explained what was coming out of his mouth she's completely opposed to. And these are the reasons why. And then she should have left. So that's a perfect example of a process that's going to help weed out.
You think Whitmer's been weeded out?
No, of course not. I think that, I think Obama and Clinton back in the early days of their campaign made similar mistakes like that. So the question isn't, do you make a mistake like that? The question is, as you campaign and operate, do you learn from that? And she, of course, could be an extremely viable person, but that's part of the benefit of going through all.
But again, beyond the literal interaction that Whitmer had there, I think the symbolic bind is my question for you. I don't think you can both resist and engage, right? You're either opposing or you're trying to find...
Well, we should oppose, and if we find common ground, we should take it. But I just should add, it may not apply to your listeners and you and me, but 99.9% of the people in the United States don't even know what we're talking about right now, about Whitmer and the folders.
Well, I think Politico's listeners are in the know.
I just said that.
But that's also why I think beyond the image, it's important to think about how do Democrats navigate this moment. You have to find a narrative, as you said. You have to have the people singing from the same songbook. But I think there still is debate on which songbook are they singing from?
Well, the real answer to your question is, it sounds terrible, but I'll say it anyway.
Say it.
I mean, we're out of power. We can't do anything. Okay, so we have to.
We got that. Yeah.
But so to answer your question, we should pretend like we're going to work with them when we can, but we're fundamentally opposing them. And what we ought to be doing is opposing them as much as we can, but not get caught when it looks like we're opposing them for the sake of opposing them. But fundamentally, they've made it easy. It's impossible to work with this administration because they are pursuing a extreme right-wing agenda, and they're operating in a government that we've never had before in terms of not three equal branches, but one executive branch running everything. And the Republican Congress, they're not even around. And by the way, I'll tell you, the process we've had of co-equal branches of government, regardless of who's in control of the Congress and the White House, has led to better governing. And I'll give you a specific example. So while I think we've only had maybe 11 people that have ever been put forward by a president for Senate confirmation, I think it's like 11, only 11 have gone forward and been turned down. Mm-hmm. But the fact is that even if you have control of your own party, what we've done in the past is, if you're in the White House and you're going to nominate people, you go up on the advice and consent and talk to the Congress before you nominate them. So what happened here was Trump knew that he could not, because he has complete control of the Republican Party, he knew he could nominate whoever he wanted, and the Senate was going to vote for them. So there's been no weeding out. And he's got 3 or 4 or 5 at least cabinet secretaries who are manifestly unfit for office. And ultimately, as I said earlier, I'll say it again, ultimately, Trump and the Republicans are going to be measured not on what photo op Kristi Noem does today at the border. Ultimately, this administration is going to be evaluated on their performance. You've got a large number of people who are unqualified for these jobs. And ultimately, a year and a half from now, it's going to matter in terms of people's lives. And that's going to be the single most important determinant about how people feel about this administration.
We've talked about a number of names. We talked about Whitmer, Newsom, Kamala Harris. Should she try to run for the White House again?
Well, the first thing she has to decide is whether she's going to run for governor. And obviously, you have to think about whether she's going to run for president.
Should she run for governor?
Yeah, I think she shouldn't decide what she's going to do for any elected office unless she knows why she's running and being able to articulate to whether it's people in California for governor or president, what she wants to do as president. If you can't answer that, you shouldn't run.
Do you think, given the toxicity of the Democratic brand that you talked about, that some of the leaders that were so visible at a time when the Democratic brand was so toxic should still be out front and center in the party?
Well, the short answer is no. I think the country wants to do leadership, and I can, at some point before we go, if you want, I can give you a modicum of optimism.
Give me some names that make you optimistic about the party.
Well, I mean, I think the governors have a variety of governors around the country. You mentioned Whitmer, Pritzker, Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania, Polis out in Colorado. These are people who've been governors. They've performed extremely well. They have credibility in talking about where they want to lead the country based on what they've accomplished as governor, maybe more from Maryland. So I think we have a half a dozen to a dozen people who potentially could be attractive candidates. But again, we're never really going to know who's got what until they're out there and are forced to perform.
I'm just going to ask you, talk to your party. What did they do over the next year?
Well, I think I've said it. I think the most important thing is to have a narrative both about defining the Trump and the Republican Party every single day, whatever the single event is that day. We bring it back to that narrative. And the second thing is we ought to have a set of principles and positions that are primarily economic, that demonstrate what we are for and who we are as a party. And I think that largely that's what we should be doing now between now and the midterms.
Are there issues that Democrats need to let go of, put on the back burner?
Well, when I run campaigns, there are 2 kinds of issues. There are issues you win on and issues you lose on. So if you're running a campaign, what you want to do is try to neutralize the issues you lose on so you can talk about the issues you can win on. And so to me, the issues that we can win on, and I've said it several times, I'll say it again,
Are
the issue
economic.
are
Mhm.
economic, and I think the populist economic message that Sanders and AOC are putting out is largely the direction as a party that we should pursue. And I think we are better off not talking about social issues. And to the extent that we do, I think we should try to figure out how to neutralize those issues so that we can move back to the issues that we can win on, which are economic, because I firmly believe that this country is going to learn in very real terms and very soon what the implications are of the shock and awe first 100 days of Trump and how it's going to impact their lives. And while I do think that people do believe that our government has waste and that we need to change it, I don't think Democrats should be sitting there trying to maintain the status quo. I also believe that an increasing number of people in this country are dependent on what government does for them. And while they may not appreciate it as much now, they're going to appreciate it more when they see the impact of all the Doge cuts. And it wasn't strategic. It was a fire now and aim later. It's a countless number of things that people take for granted in our government right now. And when they're no longer being performed by our government and people see what the impact in their lives, they're going to know who to blame.
Wait, Doug, so where's the hope?
Oh, I'll tell you what the hope is. I'm not sure I'll be around to see it, but you're young enough that you will be around to see it. So we're in a transition period in our country. This is the biggest period of transition in our country since the late 1800s, when we went from an agrarian society to an industrial society. That tradition took 30, 40 years before people felt it all. And so you had, 40-year-old farmers who got laid off in the late 1800s because we're moving to a new kind of economic society. Their kids, however, were benefited 20 and 30 years later. Corporations went to the government leaders and said, we don't have trained workers for this new society. And so they created high schools to create the opportunity. So whereas that farmer never recovered from that transition, the farmer's kids and the farmer's kids' kids, 20 and 30 years later, hugely benefited from that transition. So we've been transitioning now, began in the 1970s, from a top-down manufacturing industrial economy to a 21st century digital and global one. We are now, since the beginning of this century, 11 out of the last 13 elections, the country's voted for against whoever's in power. Mm-hmm. At least changing the White House and or the House and Senate. I think we're going to continue that probably for the 5 or so years. We're in this transition as we did it in the early 1900s. But what's going to get us out of this is going to be, I think, probably by the middle of the next decade. The secret to how we're going to get out of this is the baby boomers, my generation, we're going to die. And we're going to not be the leaders of this country anymore. And once we've had this transition of leadership to the next generation, and they're doing it you see it all around America right now in local communities. People are banding together to impact and make their lives better because they know that they have to do it because they know that they don't do it, no one is going to do it. And young people think that both parties suck. And young people,
seen it.
They have much more in common with each other. And people say, well, I don't understand, 70% of the people want gun control and nothing's happening. 70% of the people are worried about the climate. But what's going to happen 5 and 10 years from now when the baby boomers have died off is these issues that animated these young people, who now are the biggest population in America, and by the end of this decade will be the largest voting group. This is the generation that knows nothing except going to school and seeing all these slaughters of kids, and that's why they want gun control. These are the people, not just Democrats, who are worried about the environment. Once they're in power, and all of a sudden how you position yourself on those issues is going to decide whether you get reelected or not. Politicians are going to change their positions on these issues to appeal to the people who are going to decide whether they keep their jobs or not. So the future for all of us, but particularly for Democrats, is we need to create an opportunity for people, the 70% who don't go to college, for them to have a middle-class life that's like the previous generation. And we have great jobs of the future, and we're starting the process of training people for these jobs. You're seeing a decline in people going to 4-year colleges because they know now that they can go on a track to get the training for these jobs. And so I think 5 or 10 years from now, I'm quite optimistic when we have a change of leadership in our country, and we're accelerating the process of creating opportunities for people in this country that don't have a college degree. But that takes time. And so, if you look at the sweep of history, if you look back from the transition from an agrarian society to an industrial society, If you say it took 30 years, well, in the sweep of history, that's not very long. But if you're in the barrel like we are right now, 25 years in the barrel, it feels like it's going to go on forever. And so I think we're going to make the turn, but I don't think it's going to happen in the next 4 or 5 years. It's going to take long.
All right. Doug Sosnik taking the long arc of history kind of view on politics. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.